aliens' cry for help was heard by the galaxy's most lethal beings. The signal came from the darkest corner of the outer rim, where stars were few and hope was even fewer. It was a simple message, repeated over and over again in 17 different languages, each one carrying the same desperate plea. This is the collective. We are under attack. Our world is dying. Please, if anyone can hear us, we need help. We have no weapons. We have no fleet. We are peaceful people. Please help us. The message had been broadcasting for 19 standard days before it reached the communication arrays of the Galactic Council. The Council was the supreme governing body of known space, representing over 400 different species spread across thousands of star systems. They had ships. They had weapons. They had the power to help. They chose not to. Ambassador of the stood in the center of the great council chamber on the station called Unity Prime. The chamber was enormous, a vast dome of polished metal and crystalline viewports that looked out upon the stars. Seats rose in concentric circles around the central platform, filled with representatives from dozens of species. Some had scales, some had feathers, some had no solid form at all, but they all shared one thing in common as they looked down at the desperate ambassador. They all looked away from his eyes. Was a beautiful creature by any standard. His people had evolved on a world of eternal twilight, where bioluminescent forests stretched from pole to pole, and the air itself seemed to glow with soft light. They had developed translucent wings that could catch and refract light in stunning displays, and their bodies were slender and graceful, designed for gliding through their forest canopies. But they had also evolved without predators. Their world had been gentle to them, and so they had become gentle in return. They had never developed weapons. They had never learned to fight. In all their recorded history, spanning over 12,000 years, they had never killed another sentient being. Now that history was about to end. "Please," said, and his voice carried the harmonic resonance of his kind, a sound like crystal chimes in a soft breeze. "The harvesters have already taken 3 of our outer colonies. 12 million of my people are dead, not killed in battle but consumed, eaten alive while they screamed for help that never came." He paused, letting that image settle over the council. Several representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few made notes on their data tablets. None of them spoke. "Our has a population of 4 billion, continued. 4 billion souls who have never harmed anyone. 4 billion artists and healers and teachers and children. The harvesters will reach us in less than 2 standard rotations. When they do, they will consume everything. Every man, woman, and child. Every memory. Every dream. Everything we have ever been will be gone, and the universe will continue as if we never existed." He spread his wings, and the light from the chamber's illumination strips caught them, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the walls. It was a gesture of supplication among his people, an act of complete surrender and trust. "I am not asking you to save us for our sake alone. I am asking you to save us because if you do not, if you let the harvesters take another world without opposition, you are telling them that the galaxy belongs to those who can take it. You are telling them that peace is weakness, and that the gentle will always be devoured by the strong." High Counselor leaned forward in his central seat. He was a species known for their massive size and their scales that gleamed like polished obsidian. They were one of the founding species of the Council and had held his position for over 30 years. He was considered wise. He was considered fair. He was also considered practical. "Ambassador," said, his deep voice rumbling through the chamber like distant thunder, "the Council has heard your plea and we grieve for your people's suffering, but you must understand our position." He gestured with one clawed hand toward the star map that floated above the chamber's center, showing the known galaxy in glittering detail. "The harvesters are not a conventional enemy. They are a swarm intelligence, a collective organism spread across millions of individual bodies. They do not negotiate. They do not retreat. They do not stop. In the 300 years since their first appearance in our galaxy, they have consumed 47 different species, entire civilizations erased from existence. Paused, letting those numbers sink in. Every fleet that has engaged them has been destroyed. They sent their entire armada against a harvester incursion 2 centuries ago. 12,000 ships. None returned. The harvesters simply absorbed the biomass from the crews and used the raw materials from the ships to build more of themselves. "So you will do nothing?" asked, and there was no accusation in his voice, only a terrible, empty acceptance. "We will offer evacuation assistance," said. "We can save perhaps 200,000 of your people before the harvesters arrive. They will be resettled on council worlds, given resources to rebuild what they can of your culture. 200,000 out of 4 billion. It is what we can offer. I am sorry, Ambassador, truly I am. But sending our fleets to Prime would accomplish nothing except adding our dead to yours. The harvesters cannot be stopped. They can only be avoided." Wings folded slowly against his back. The rainbow light faded from the walls. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to make one final plea, perhaps simply to thank the council for at least listening. He never got the chance. "That's not entirely accurate, High Counselor." The voice came from the gallery entrance, and every head in the chamber turned to look. A single figure stood there, silhouetted against the harsh corridor lights. She was small by galactic standards, barely reaching the chest height of a. She walked on 2 legs and had 2 arms with 5 digits on each hand. Her skin was soft and brown, without scales or chitin or any natural armor. Her hair was black and curly, pulled back from her face in a practical style that kept it out of her eyes. She wore a uniform of deep blue, with silver trim and a patch on her shoulder that made several council members visibly flinch. The patch showed a planet, blue and green and white, circled by a ring of stars. "Earth." Commander Lisa Vance of the United Earth Navy walked into the chamber as if she had been invited. Her boots clicked against the polished floor with each step, a steady rhythm that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Behind her, 2 more humans followed. One was a tall man with pale skin and red hair, wearing the same blue uniform with different insignia. The other was a shorter woman with Asian features and a data tablet clutched in her hands. "The humans," someone whispered from the gallery, and the word spread through the chamber like ripples in a pond. High Counselor rose from his seat, his massive form casting a shadow across the central platform. "Commander Vance, this is a closed session of the Galactic Council. Your species is not a member of this body, and you have no right to." "We picked up the distress signal 47 hours ago," Lisa interrupted, her voice calm and clear. "We've already dispatched a response fleet. I'm here as a courtesy to inform the Council of our intentions." The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted over each other in a dozen different languages. Translators struggled to keep up with the sudden flood of voices. Somewhere in the upper galleries, a delegate was making a high-pitched sound that its species used to express extreme distress. Raised one massive hand, and slowly, reluctantly, the chamber fell silent. "You have dispatched a fleet," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "to Prime to engage the harvesters." "That is correct." "Commander, I do not know if you understand what you are saying. The harvesters have destroyed every military force that has ever opposed them. Your species has been part of the galactic community for less than 50 years. You have no experience fighting an enemy like this. You are sending your people to die." Lisa Vance smiled. It was a small smile, barely a quirk of her lips, but there was something in it that made several council members lean back in their seats. "High Counselor, with respect, you don't know very much about humans." She turned to look at, who had been watching this exchange with his large, luminous eyes. The ambassador seemed frozen in place, unable to process what he was hearing. "Ambassador," Lisa said, "my government has authorized me to offer you the full assistance of the United Earth Navy. We will defend your, We will engage the harvesters. We will do everything in our power to save your people." Wings trembled. But why? We have nothing to offer you. We cannot pay for such a service. We have no strategic resources, no military value, nothing that could possibly justify. "You asked for help." The simple statement seemed to confuse the ambassador even more than the offer itself. He tilted his head, a gesture his species used to express bewilderment. "I do not understand." Lisa stepped closer to him and her expression softened. Someone was in trouble. Someone was scared and alone and asking for help. That's all we needed to know. She glanced back at the council, at the rows of representatives who had sat in their comfortable seats and voted to let 4 billion people die. "Where we come from, that's what matters." The tall, red-haired man stepped forward. His uniform identified him as a captain, and his name tag read, "Commander, we should get moving. The fleet will be arriving at Prime in approximately 31 hours. We need to brief the government on evacuation procedures and coordinate our defense strategy." "Captain is right," Lisa looked at. "Ambassador, I need you to come with us. We have a lot of planning to do and not much time to do it." Looked at her, then at the council, then back at her. Slowly his wings began to spread, catching the light once more. Yes, I will come with you." As they turned to leave, High Counselor called out from his seat, "Commander Vance." She paused at the entrance, looking back over her shoulder. "Why?" they asked. "You say that someone asked for help and that is enough, but your ships will be destroyed. Your people will die. Thousands of humans will sacrifice their lives for a species they have never met who can offer them nothing in return. I have studied your kind for many years and I still do not understand. Why do you do this?" Lisa considered the question for a long moment. Behind her, the star map floated in its holographic display, showing the vast expanse of known space. Somewhere out there, a fleet of human ships was racing toward a battle that the rest of the galaxy had declared unwinnable. "Because someone has to," she said finally. "Because if we don't stand up for the people who can't stand up for themselves, then what's the point of having the power to stand at all?" She turned and walked out of the chamber, her boots clicking against the floor in that same steady rhythm. Followed her, his wings glowing with a light that seemed brighter than before. Behind them, the Galactic Council sat in stunned silence. The human fleet arrived at Prime, with 29 hours to spare before the harvesters reached the system. 47 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming in the light of the sun. They were not the largest ships in the galaxy. They were not the most advanced. But there was something about them, something in the way they held their positions with mathematical precision, that made the observers catch their breath. The flagship was called the Relentless, and she was a beautiful ship. Her hull was sleek and aggressive, designed for speed and maneuverability rather than pure size. Her weapons arrays bristled along her sides like the quills of some ancient earth animal, and her engines glowed with a blue-white light that spoke of barely contained power. On her bridge, Captain Daniel Brooks stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the main as it displayed the planet they had come to save. Prime was a world of twilight, just as the records had described. The sun here was old and red, casting everything in shades of amber and crimson. The planet's surface was covered in forests that glowed with their own inner light, bioluminescent plants creating patterns of color that were visible even from orbit. It was beautiful. Daniel found himself hopping with a fierce intensity that surprised him, that he would be able to keep it that way. "Captain, we have established communication with the planetary government." The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Amy, his second in command. She was a small woman with sharp features and sharper eyes, and she had served with Daniel for almost 8 years. He trusted her with his life and with the lives of everyone on his ship. "Put them through," Daniel said. The flickered, and a face appeared. The alien had the same translucent wings and luminous eyes as Ambassador, but his wings were marked with patterns of blue and silver that indicated advanced age among his species. "I am Prime Minister Han of the Collective," the alien said. "Captain Brooks, I do not have words to express what your presence here means to my people. When Ambassador told us that humans were coming to help us, many did not believe him. We thought it must be a mistake, or perhaps a cruel joke." "No mistake, Prime Minister. No joke. We're here and we're not leaving until your people are safe." Han's wings rippled with color, a display that Daniel's cultural database identified as profound emotional gratitude. "Captain, I must ask you. Why? I have read the reports from the council session. Commander Vance said that someone asked for help and that was enough. But surely there must be more to it than that. Your people will die here. We have nothing to give you in return." Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer. He thought about his grandmother, who had immigrated to America from Mexico when she was just 16 years old, carrying nothing but a small bag and a heart full of hope. He thought about his father, who had served in the Navy for 30 years and taught Daniel that service meant putting others before yourself. He thought about his daughter, barely 7 years old, who had cried when he told her he was going away for a while, but had also said she was proud of him. "Prime Minister," Daniel said finally, "where I come from we have a concept called duty. It's not about what we get in return. It's about what we owe to each other as living beings sharing the same universe. When someone is hurting, when someone needs help, we have a duty to answer. Not because it benefits us, but because it's the right thing to do." He paused, then added, "My grandmother had a saying. She used to tell me that the world is made better one act of kindness at a time. She said that every time we help someone, we put a little more light into the darkness. That's why we're here, Prime Minister, to put some light into the darkness." Han was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "Your grandmother sounds like she would have been welcome among my people, Captain. She would have liked it here, I think. All those glowing forests would have reminded her of the fireflies back home." The conversation continued, turning to practical matters: evacuation plans, shelter locations, communication protocols. There was so much to do and so little time to do it. In the ship's tactical center, Lieutenant Commander Amy was running simulations. The harvesters would arrive in force, millions of individual units controlled by a hive intelligence that had been consuming civilizations for 3 centuries. Standard tactics wouldn't work against them. The harvesters adapted too quickly, learned too fast, and simply had too many bodies to throw at any problem. But Amy had been studying the harvesters for months, ever since Earth had first learned of their existence. She had analyzed every recorded engagement, every sensor log, every scrap of data that the galactic community had managed to preserve. And she had found something that the others had missed. The harvesters were not truly a hive mind. They were more like a network, with processing nodes that handled the complex calculations needed to coordinate millions of units. Destroy enough of those nodes, and the swarm would lose its coordination. The individual units would revert to simple instincts, becoming dangerous but predictable. The problem was reaching those nodes. They were always protected by the densest concentrations of harvester units, surrounded by living shields that could absorb almost any attack. Almost any attack. Amy pulled up the specifications for the weapons that Earth had been developing in secret for the past decade. They called them biodisruptors, devices that released a targeted pathogen designed to attack the specific biochemistry of the harvesters. One payload, delivered directly into a processing node, could shut it down permanently. The trick was getting close enough to deliver that payload. "Commander." She looked up to find a young ensign standing at attention nearby. His name was, and he couldn't have been more than 22 years old. His eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and determination that Amy recognized from her own early days in the service. What is it, Ensign? Ma'am, the strike team volunteers have assembled in briefing room 3. They're waiting for you. Amy nodded slowly. The strike teams, the ones who would fly directly into the heart of the Harvester swarm, carrying biodisruptors in ships barely larger than shuttles, the ones who would almost certainly not be coming back. There had been no shortage of volunteers. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. When she entered briefing room 3, she found 37 men and women standing at attention. They were pilots, Marines, special operations officers. They came from different ships, different backgrounds, different corners of Earth. But they had all raised their hands when the call went out for volunteers willing to fly what Command had classified as high-risk insertion missions. Amy had reviewed their files. She knew their names, their histories, their families. She knew that Corporal Jenny White had a sister back on Earth who was expecting her first child. She knew that Sergeant Pete had been saving up for a house in the countryside where he planned to retire and raise horses. She knew that Lieutenant Chris Morgan had proposed to his girlfriend just 3 days before shipping out, and that she had said yes. They all knew what they were signing up for. They had volunteered anyway. At ease, Amy said, and the room relaxed slightly. I'm not going to waste your time with speeches about duty and honor. You already know why you're here, so let me just give you the facts. She activated the holographic display, showing a tactical representation of the Harvester swarm. The swarm has 17 processing nodes. These are the brain centers of the hive, the points where all the coordination happens. Our main fleet will engage the swarm's outer perimeter, drawing their attention and creating openings. Your job is to fly through those openings and deliver biodisruptors directly into the processing nodes. She zoomed in on one of the nodes, showing its structure in detail. Each node is approximately 3 kilometers in diameter, surrounded by a defensive shell of harvester units roughly 500 meters thick. You will need to penetrate that shell, reach the node's core, deploy your payload, and extract before the node's death triggers a defensive response from surrounding units. The room was silent. Everyone understood what she was really saying. Get in, deliver the weapon, probably die trying to get out. Questions? A hand went up. It belonged to Corporal Jenny White, a young woman with short hair and freckles across her nose. Ma'am, what happens if we manage to destroy all 17 nodes? The swarm loses coordination. Individual units will continue to be dangerous, but they'll become predictable. Our fleet can handle predictable. It's the coordinated attacks, the adaptive strategies that make the harvesters so deadly. Take out the nodes and we can beat them. Another hand. Sergeant Pete, a stocky man with a shaved head and arms covered in tattoos. Ma'am, how many of us do you expect to make it back? Amy met his eyes. She would not lie to them. They deserved better than that. Based on our simulations, approximately 30% of strike team members should survive to extraction. But those numbers assume everything goes according to plan, and nothing ever goes according to plan. I want you all to be prepared for the possibility that this is a one-way trip. 37 people looked back at her. Not one of them flinched. Not one of them looked away. Any more questions? Lieutenant Chris Morgan raised his hand. He was tall and handsome, with the easy confidence of a natural pilot. Just one, ma'am. When do we launch? Amy smiled. It was a small smile, but it was genuine. Soon, get some rest while you can. You're going to need it. On the planet below, the evacuation was proceeding as quickly as possible. Human shuttles flew alongside transport craft, carrying civilians from the major population centers to underground shelters that had been reinforced against orbital bombardment. Commander Lisa Vance stood in the central plaza of the capital city, watching a group of children board an evacuation shuttle. They were small, their wings not yet fully developed, and they looked up at the human soldiers with wide, curious eyes. One of the children, a little girl with wings that shimmered pink and gold, broke away from the group and approached Lisa. She said something in the language, then looked confused when Lisa didn't respond. A translation device on Lisa's collar kicked in a moment later. "Are you one of the humans, the ones who came to help us?" Lisa knelt down so she was at eye level with the child. "Yes, I am. My name is Lisa. What's your name?" My mother says you came from very far away to fight the monsters. She says you're very brave." "Your mother is very kind, but I'm not that brave. I'm just doing my job." The little girl tilted her head, considering this. "My teacher says that bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Are you scared?" Lisa thought about the harvester swarm, millions of units strong, racing toward this world. She thought about the ships in orbit above them, crewed by men and women who had families waiting for them back home. She thought about the strike teams, preparing to fly into almost certain death because it was the only chance they had. "Yes," she said honestly, "I'm very scared." Nodded solemnly. Then she reached out and took Lisa's hand in her small, delicate fingers. "It's okay to be scared. My mother says that too. She says being scared means you understand how important something is. You're scared because you want to protect us, right?" "That's right." "Then I'm not scared anymore, because you're here." The little girl squeezed Lisa's hand once, then released it and ran back to join the other children boarding the shuttle. Lisa watched her go, feeling something tighten in her chest. She thought about her own niece back on Earth, about the same age as. She thought about what she would want someone to do if her niece's world was under threat. She straightened up and walked back toward the command center, her stride purposeful. There was still so much work to do. In orbit, the human fleet was taking up defensive positions. Captain Daniel Brooks had arranged his ships in a complex formation designed to maximize their overlapping fields of fire while still allowing for rapid redeployment. The carriers were positioned behind the main battle line, their fighter wings prepped and ready for launch. On the bridge of the Relentless, Daniel studied the latest sensor reports. The Harvester swarm was 12 hours out now, close enough that their long-range scanners could pick up the leading edge of the formation. "Sir, you should see this." He turned to find Amy at the sensor station, her face pale. "What is it?" "The swarm, sir. We estimated 12 million units based on the initial reports from the colonies. The actual number is higher." She transferred the data to the main. Daniel felt his blood run cold. 18 million units. 18 million individual harvester organisms, each one the size of a small shuttle, each one armed with natural weapons that could tear through hull plating like paper. And behind them, barely visible on long-range sensors, were the processing nodes. 23 of them, not 17 as their intelligence had suggested. The harvesters had been growing. They had been feeding. "How is this possible?" Daniel asked, his voice tight. "The reports from the outer colonies." "The reports were 3 weeks old, sir. The harvesters must have consumed additional biomass along the way, possibly from ships or stations that we don't have records of." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing this information. 18 million units, 23 processing nodes. His fleet of 47 ships suddenly felt very, very small. When he opened his eyes, Amy was watching him. Behind her, the bridge crew had gone silent, waiting for their captain's response. "Does this change our plan?" she asked quietly. Daniel thought about Han, the Prime Minister who had welcomed them with tears in his eyes. He thought about Little holding Commander Vance's hand and saying she wasn't scared anymore because the humans were there. He thought about his grandmother, talking about putting light into the darkness. "No," he said, "it doesn't change anything. We came here to save these people, and that's what we're going to do." He turned to face the bridge crew, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "I know what the numbers say. I know what the simulations predict. But I also know that simulations don't account for human determination. They don't account for the fact that every single person on this ship volunteered to be here, knowing what we were facing. They don't account for the lengths we'll go to when we're fighting for something that matters. He walked to the center of the bridge, standing where his crew could see him clearly. In a few hours, we're going to engage an enemy that has never been beaten, an enemy that has consumed 47 species without losing a single major engagement. The rest of the galaxy thinks we're crazy. The rest of the galaxy thinks we're going to die. He smiled, and there was something fierce in that expression. Let's show them what humans are made of. The hours passed with agonizing slowness. On the ships, crews made final preparations. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Shuttles were loaded with supplies and medical equipment. Personal messages were recorded and stored in the ship's databases, to be transmitted home in case the sender didn't survive to deliver them in person. In the fighter bays of the carrier vessels, pilots gathered for one last briefing. Lieutenant Chris Morgan stood at the front of the room, a holographic representation of the battlefield floating behind him. All right, listen up. Our job is simple. Keep the harvesters busy. Draw their attention. Give the strike teams the openings they need to reach the processing nodes. Every second we keep them occupied is a second our people have to complete their mission. He pointed to a section of the holographic display. The harvesters will try to overwhelm us with numbers. That's what they always do. They'll come at us in waves, trying to grind us down through attrition. Our advantage is that we're faster, more maneuverable, and a hell of a lot smarter than a bunch of bugs following instinct. Use that advantage. Stay mobile. Don't get pinned down. And for God's sake, watch your wingman's back. A pilot raised his hand. His name was Tommy Park, a second-generation Korean-American who had followed his father into the Navy. Sir, what about the processing nodes? If we see an opening, should we try to take a shot? Chris shook his head. Negative. The nodes are too well protected for our standard weapons. You'd just be throwing your life away. Our job is to create opportunities, not to be heroes. Leave the nodes to the strike teams. They've got the tools and the training to handle them. He looked around the room at the faces of his fellow pilots. Some were scared. Some were excited. All of them were determined. I'm not going to pretend this is going to be easy. Some of us aren't going to make it home. That's the reality we signed up for when we put on these uniforms. But I want you to remember something while you're out there. He pointed toward which showed the glowing forests of Prime below them. 4 billion people are counting on us. 4 billion people who have never hurt anyone, who have spent their entire existence trying to make the universe a more beautiful place. If we fail, they die. All of them. Every artist, every healer, every child, every dream they ever had. His voice hardened. I don't know about you, but I'm not going to let that happen. So when you're out there, when you're tired and scared and you don't think you can keep going, I want you to think about those 4 billion people. I want you to think about what we're fighting for, and I want you to give those harvester bastards everything you've got. The room erupted in cheers. On the surface of Prime, the final evacuations were. The shelters were nearly full, their reinforced doors ready to seal at a moment's notice. In the skis above, and human craft worked side by side, ferrying the last of the civilians to safety. Sergeant Major Bate Collins stood at the entrance to one of the largest shelters, directing traffic with the calm efficiency of a woman who had done this dozens of times before. Her Marines were spread out along the approach routes, providing security and helping families who were struggling with their belongings. A young Marine named Tony jogged up to her, slightly out of breath. Sergeant Major, we've got a problem. There's a medical facility on the eastern edge of the city that hasn't finished evacuating. They've got patients who can't be moved without special equipment, and their transport broke down. Bate muttered a curse under her breath. The eastern edge was dangerously exposed. If the harvesters managed to land ground forces before the battle was decided, that area would be hit first. How many patients? About 100, ma'am, including a wing of the children's hospital. Children? Of course it was children. Get me a squad of volunteers and 3 working transports. We're going to get those people out. Tony hesitated. Ma'am, the captain said to hold position until. The captain isn't here and those are children. Now move. 20 minutes later, Bate and her squad reached the medical facility. It was a beautiful building, all curved lines and organic shapes that blended into the surrounding forest. Bioluminescent panels on the walls provided soft lighting, and the air smelled of flowers and healing herbs. The staff met her at the entrance, their wings trembling with anxiety. A doctor who introduced himself as and explained the situation. They had 60 adult patients and 42 children, many of them recovering from serious illnesses or injuries. Moving them required specialized anti-gravity stretchers that their backup transport didn't have. Bate looked at her team. 6 Marines, 3 transports, 100 patients. Okay, she said, here's what we're going to do. The next hour was a blur of activity. The Marines worked alongside the staff, improvising solutions on the fly. They rigged stretchers from spare parts. They carried patients who couldn't be moved any other way. They made trip after trip to the shelters, never stopping, never slowing down. Tony found himself carrying a child who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. The little boy's wings were wrapped in medical bandages, and his large eyes watched Tony with curious fascination. "What's your name?" Tony asked as they walked. "Han," the child replied. "You're very tall. Are all humans this tall?" Tony laughed. "I'm actually pretty average for a human. Some of us are a lot taller." "That's amazing. On my world, being tall is very rare. My father is tall, and everyone says I'll be tall too when I grow up." "I'm sure you will be," Tony said. Han was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Are you scared of the monsters?" Tony thought about the harvester swarm, 18 million strong, racing toward them through space. He thought about what those creatures would do to this child if they got past the fleet. He thought about his own little brother back on Earth, about the same age as Han. "A little," he admitted, "but being scared is okay. It means you understand how important something is." "That's what the lady soldier said earlier, the one with the dark hair." Tony smiled. "That sounds like our commander. She's pretty smart." "She said she was scared too, but she said she came anyway because you wanted to protect us. Is that true?" "Yes," Tony said, "that's true." They reached the shelter entrance, and Tony carefully handed Han to a waiting medical technician. The child looked back at him as he was carried inside. "Thank you for coming to help us," Han said. "My mother says humans are very brave. I think she's right." Tony watched the child disappear into the shelter, feeling something warm and fierce burning in his chest. He turned and jogged back toward the medical facility. There were more patients to evacuate, and time was running out. In space, the leading edge of the harvester swarm had entered the system. Captain Daniel Brooks watched the sensor display as the first contact markers appeared. They were still hours away from engagement range, but already the scale of what they were facing was becoming clear. The swarm stretched across space like a living wall, blotting out the stars behind it. "All ships, this is Captain Brooks." His voice was steady, calm. "The enemy has entered the system. Battle stations." Throughout the fleet, klaxons sounded and crew members rushed to their positions. Weapons systems powered up. Shields activated. Fighter pilots climbed into their cockpits and ran through their final pre-flight checks. On the Relentless, Amy was monitoring the tactical display when something caught her attention. A small anomaly in the swarm's formation, a slight gap in their otherwise perfect synchronization. "Captain, I'm seeing something strange." Daniel moved to stand beside her. "Show me." She highlighted the section of the display. "Here. The swarm is maintaining a standard approach formation, but there's a delay in their coordination signals. See how the units on the left flank are responding about 3 milliseconds slower than the others." What does that mean? I'm not sure yet, but it might indicate that one of the processing nodes is damaged or malfunctioning. If we can identify which one, we might be able to exploit the weakness. Daniel nodded slowly. Keep analyzing. Let me know as soon as you have something concrete. He turned back to watching the swarm grow larger as it approached. 18 million units, 23 processing nodes, and somewhere in that mass of chitinous bodies and cold intelligence, there might be a weakness they could use. The battle for Prime was about to begin. In the strike team ready room, Corporal Jenny White was writing a letter. Not a digital message, but an actual handwritten letter on paper that she had brought from Earth specifically for this purpose. Her sister loved getting handwritten letters. She said they felt more personal, more real. "Dear Sarah," Jenny wrote, "if you're reading this, it means things didn't go the way I hoped, but I want you to know that I'm okay with that. Not happy about it, but okay. Because I'm doing something that matters. I'm fighting for people who can't fight for themselves, and that's what Dad always taught us to do." She paused, thinking about how to continue. "I know you're going to be mad at me. You always told me that joining the military was too dangerous, that I had my whole life ahead of me, that I shouldn't throw it away on someone else's war. But here's the thing, sis. It's not someone else's war. It's everyone's war. Because if we don't stand up for the people who need help, who will?" She looked up at the bulkhead, imagining she could see through it to the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, the harvesters were coming. Somewhere out there, 4 billion people were waiting to see if they would live or die. "I'm scared, Sarah. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't, but I'm also proud. Proud of what we're doing here. Proud of the people I'm fighting alongside. And proud that when someone called for help, we were the ones who answered." She signed the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in an envelope with her sister's address written on the front. Then she stood up and walked to the mission briefing, ready to fly into the heart of an enemy swarm that had never been defeated. Because someone had to. Because that was what humans did. The first shots of the Battle of Prime were fired at 3:47 hours, ship time. The Relentless opened up with her main batteries, sending streams of plasma fire into the leading edge of the Harvester swarm. The shots carved burning paths through the enemy formation, vaporizing dozens of units with each blast. But for every Harvester that died, 100 more took its place. "All fighters launch," Daniel Brooks ordered. From the carrier ships, thousands of small craft poured into space. They flew in precise formation, their engines burning bright against the darkness. At their head was Lieutenant Chris Morgan, his Reaper emblazoned on the side of his fighter. "All wings form up on me. We're going to punch a hole in their formation and give our strike teams a clear path. Stay tight, watch your spacing, and don't do anything stupid." The fighters screamed toward the swarm, their weapons filling space with fire. The Harvesters responded by shifting their formation, sending waves of units to intercept the attack. The two forces met in a storm of violence that lit up the darkness like a new sun. Chris found himself weaving through a nightmare of chitinous bodies and snapping mandibles. His targeting computer was screaming warnings, telling him that enemies were everywhere, that there was no way out. He ignored it. He had learned a long time ago that computers didn't account for human instinct, human creativity, human refusal to accept defeat. "Wing 2, break left. Wing 3, cover the insertion vector." His squadron responded instantly, their movements so coordinated they seemed to share a single mind. Together, they carved a path through the swarm, leaving burning Harvester bodies in their wake. Behind them, the first strike team made its run. Corporal Jenny White's shuttle burst through the gap that the fighters had created, her pilot pushing the engines to their absolute limit. Around them, Harvesters swarmed like angry hornets, but the fighter escort kept them at bay, sacrificing themselves to keep the path clear. 30 seconds to processing node, the pilot called out. Jenny checked her biodisruptor one last time. The weapon was about the size of a large briefcase, with a simple interface showing its armed status. She would have one chance to deliver it, one chance to make a difference. The shuttle shook as a harvester clipped their port wing, tearing away a chunk of hull plating. Warning lights flickered across the cockpit. "We're losing pressure in sections 3 and 4, someone shouted. "Keep going," Jenny replied. "We're almost there." The processing node loomed ahead of them, a massive organic structure pulsing with bioluminescent light. It was surrounded by a dense shell of harvester units, thousands of them clustered together in a living wall. "We're not going to make it through that," the pilot said, his voice tight with fear. Jenny looked at the wall of enemies ahead of them. She looked at the biodisruptor in her hands. She thought about her sister, about the letter waiting to be delivered, about the 4 billion people depending on them. "Yes, we are," she said, "full speed ahead." The shuttle punched into the defensive shell like a bullet through paper. Harvesters tore at the hull, ripping away sections of armor, but the shuttle kept going. The pilot was flying on pure instinct now, dodging and weaving through spaces that should have been impossible. They broke through. The interior of the processing node was unlike anything Jenny had ever seen. Organic structures stretched in all directions, pulsing with a sickly light. Neural pathways the size of highways connected different sections, carrying the signals that coordinated millions of harvester units. "There," Jenny said, pointing to a central structure that seemed to be the heart of the node. "Get me as close as you can." The shuttle lurched toward the target, its damaged engines struggling to maintain altitude. Jenny moved to the airlock, biodisruptor in hand. "Opening in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. The airlock opened, and Jenny leaped into the void. There was no gravity inside the node, so she floated toward her target, using small bursts from her suit's thrusters to control her approach. Behind her, she could hear the shuttle taking fire, the pilot trying desperately to stay alive long enough to extract her. She reached the central structure and attached the biodisruptor to its surface. Her fingers moved across the interface, inputting the activation sequence. "Package delivered," she reported. "Activating now." She pushed herself away from the structure, trying to put as much distance between herself and the weapon as possible. The biodisruptor hummed, glowed, and then released its payload. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The node began to convulse, its neural pathways flashing with uncontrolled signals. The organic walls started to break down, dissolving into a thick soup of dead cells. All around her, harvester units that had been perfectly coordinated suddenly began to move erratically, their connection to the hive mind severed. "Node is down," Jenny reported, unable to keep the triumph out of her voice. "I repeat, node is down." "Corporal, we're taking heavy damage. We need to extract now." Jenny activated her suit's emergency beacon and pushed toward the shuttle. But even as she moved, she could see that the node's death was triggering a response from surrounding units. Harvesters were converging on her position, thousands of them, drawn by some instinctive need to destroy the thing that had hurt their collective mind. The shuttle was trying to reach her, but it was damaged and slow. The harvesters were faster. Jenny looked at the swarm closing in around her. She thought about her sister, about the letter, about all the things she would never get to do. Then she thought about the processing node she had just destroyed, about the millions of harvesters that were now operating without coordination, about the difference that single act might make in the battle. "Worth it," she whispered. The shuttle reached her at the last possible moment, a Marine extending a hand through the airlock and pulling her inside. They accelerated away from the dying node, leaving the confused harvester units behind. Jenny collapsed against the bulkhead, breathing hard. She was alive. Somehow, impossibly, she was alive. "Node 1 is confirmed destroyed," a voice crackled over the communication system. "Good work, strike team. 22 more to go." 22 more. Jenny looked at the biodisruptor storage compartment, where several more of the weapons waited. They had done the impossible once. Now they had to do it again and again until the job was done. Outside the shuttle, the Battle of Prime raged on. On the bridge of the Relentless, Captain Daniel Brooks watched the tactical display with growing hope. The strike teams were working. Processing nodes were going dark one by one, and with each one that fell, more harvester units lost their coordination. But the battle was far from over. The swarm was adapting, pulling remaining coordinated units into defensive positions around the surviving nodes. The strike teams were taking heavy casualties, their shuttles destroyed by increasingly aggressive defensive responses. And the harvesters were still pressing toward the planet. "Sir, we've lost the destroyer Vigilant. The frigate Steadfast is reporting critical damage." Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. They were losing ships, losing people, but they were also winning. For the first time in 300 years, someone was actually beating the harvesters. "Signal the fleet. Increase pressure on the swarm's left flank. We need to draw more units away from the remaining processing nodes." The battle continued for 9 grueling hours. Ships burned, people died, heroes were made and lost in the space between heartbeats. The human fleet fought with a ferocity that stunned the Galactic Council observers who were watching from a safe distance. When one ship fell, others closed ranks to fill the gap. When ammunition ran low, ships rammed their enemies directly, taking harvesters with them even in death. And through it all, the strike teams kept flying. By the time the last processing node fell, 14 of the original 37 strike team members had been killed. 3 more would die of their wounds before reaching medical facilities. The survivors were exhausted, traumatized, and would carry the scars of this battle for the rest of their lives. But they had done it. Without their processing nodes, the harvester swarm dissolved into chaos. Individual units attacked randomly, no longer capable of the coordinated strategies that had made them so deadly. The human fleet, battered but unbroken, systematically destroyed the disorganized remnants. When it was over, the space around Prime was filled with debris, the shattered remains of harvester units and the hulls of human ships floating together in the void. 11 Earth vessels had been destroyed. Over 2,000 humans had given their lives. But Prime was saved. 4 billion people would live to see another sunrise. In the central shelter beneath the capital city, Prime Minister Han watched the final reports come in. Tears streamed down his face, leaving glittering trails on his translucent skin. Around him, civilians were emerging from their hiding places, looking up at the sky with wonder and disbelief. They had survived. Against all odds, against all expectations, they had survived. A human shuttle landed in the plaza outside the shelter. Commander Lisa Vance stepped out, her uniform torn and dirty, her face lined with exhaustion. She was immediately surrounded by who wanted to thank her, to touch her, to make sure she was real. Prime Minister Han made his way through the crowd to stand before her. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, unable to find words for what he was feeling. Finally, he spread his wings in the gesture of deepest gratitude and respect. "You came," he said. "You truly came." Lisa looked at him, then at the crowd of survivors around them, then up at the sky where the fires of battle were finally fading. "Someone asked for help," she said simply. "How could we not?" Han shook his head in amazement. "The galaxy will never be the same after this day. You have shown us all something we had forgotten, that courage can triumph over fear, that compassion can be stronger than cruelty, that the strong can choose to protect the weak instead of preying upon them." He reached out and took Lisa's hand, an intimate gesture among his people. "My kind will never forget what you have done for us. For as long as they exist, we will remember the humans who came from the stars to save us, and we will try to be worthy of your sacrifice." Lisa squeezed his hand gently. "Just be kind to each other, that's all we ask." In the days that followed, the news of the Battle of Prime spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Galactic Council, which had refused to intervene, found itself facing uncomfortable questions from its member species. How could they have stood by while 4 billion people faced extinction? How could they have claimed that the Harvesters were unbeatable when a species they had dismissed as primitive and aggressive had just proven otherwise? The recordings of the battle were watched billions of times. People across the galaxy saw human pilots flying into impossible odds. They saw Marines defending hospitals full of children. They saw strike teams sacrificing themselves to destroy processing nodes. They saw a species that fought not for territory or resources, but simply because someone needed help. Captain Daniel Brooks was promoted to admiral and given command of Earth's newly expanded expeditionary fleet. Lieutenant Commander Amy became the head of Earth's Strategic Warfare Division, where she continued to develop tactics for dealing with threats that others considered unbeatable. Sergeant Major Bate Collins received humanity's highest military honor for her defense of the medical facility, an honor she accepted on behalf of all the Marines who had served with her. Corporal Jenny White survived the battle and returned home to her sister. She never talked much about what she had done, but Sarah noticed that her little sister stood a little taller now, smiled a little more easily. And sometimes, late at night, Jenny would look up at the stars with an expression that Sarah couldn't quite read. Little grew up hearing stories about the humans who saved her world. When she was old enough, she applied to study at Earth's Diplomatic Academy, becoming the first to serve in a human institution. She would eventually become her people's ambassador to Earth, spending her life building bridges between two species that had been brought together by crisis and bound together by gratitude. And somewhere in the depths of space, other species heard about what had happened at Prime, species that had been abandoned by the Galactic Council, ignored by those who should have protected them. They sent out their own distress signals, hopping against hope that someone might hear. Someone did. The humans were always listening.